Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's Common Ground. I'm Malvika Jolly, Special Projects Associate here at the Rail, and today I'm thrilled to be welcoming our friends over at Second Shift Studio Space of St. Paul in Minnesota, a nonprofit residency program and art space that we are so excited to watch unfold in the coming years. We're joined today by a wonderful panel of board members, artists, community members, and more. Featuring Chris Larson, Jennifer Newsom, Tina Tavera, Kriss Zulkosky, Roshan Gano, Shen, and Andrew Woolbright. And we'll be closing out with a poetry reading from our very own John Latta, who has some poems in our September issue, so looking forward to that. Finally, we've started out all of our events here with two important acknowledgements. The first is that here in New York, we're on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and the Shinnecock Indian Nation. The second is an acknowledgement that Black Lives Matter. And I think it's worth taking a moment to remember that the heart of both of these acknowledgements is a commitment to the liberation of the oppressed and ongoing solidarity for all those who struggle for freedom, in recognition that when it comes to our liberation, our histories never unfold in isolation. That thought coming from the fabulous Angela Davis. And in that spirit, I encourage you all to check out the chat, where in just a moment I'll drop a living document of resources and actions we've been putting together at the Rail. But we'll get right into it. So it's my honor to welcome our wonderful guests of this lunchtime. We're joined by co-founders of Second Shift Studio Space, artist Chris Larson, Kriss Zulkosky, multimedia artist and curator Tina Tavera, architect Joanna Newsom, and as an extra special treat, the 2021 and 22 artists in residence, multimedia narrative artist Roshan Gano, and film and video artist, among so much more, Shen. Of course, keeping them in conversation and in questions, we have the wonderful artist, curator, and critic Andrew Woolbright here with us today. Andrew, take it away.
Thanks so much, Malvika. Andrew Woolbright, my pronouns are he, him, and I'm thrilled to be here today with Second Shift for many reasons. But I like to start every conversation off, which is a conversation or a question I ask many people when I'm gathered in groups, which is, what do we owe each other? As artists, we're getting to a place with stressful times, where the pressures of society and the pressures of climate change are becoming more extreme, that we have to extend beyond our studio practices to offer something else. We owe each other more than that. And today, it is my honor to get to interview people who have extended what they owe to developing space, which is one of the important things we can offer artists, and artists need the most. And these are people that have gone out of their way to put up drywall, to mop floors, to fix what is broken, to create space that artists can move in and not pay rent for a year and not have to worry about all the material conditions that apply downward pressure to studio practices and what we're trying to do. So I'm excited to, also as a Midwesterner, I'm excited about this, from Southern Illinois, and get to start this interview at the Brooklyn Rail headquarters in Archipelago in New York. And this conversation is about connecting to other archipelagos across the country, these points of light that can be fused together, brought together, all these like meaningful connections of keeping sustainability and keeping life going for artists. So that being said, very excited to talk about this studio nonprofit that's been started in St. Paul, Minnesota on Payne Avenue, an old linoleum factory. And I also first want to brag a little bit about the founders of this organization, because I know they have no interest in doing it for themselves. Chris Larson is a wonderful artist, a Yale MFA from 1991, who chose to stay in St. Paul to continue to develop his community that's gone back generations in his family. An amazing artist, an amazing curator. His partner, Chris, is a frontline worker and has been the entire pandemic. So we all need to express our gratitude for that. And Tina is a independent curator who specializes in showing undershown artists. So this is a really great team of educators, frontline workers, and people who are really at work here to maintain a community. So thank you for that. So with that, let's get into second shift. Chris, I think you're muted real quick. So this is the space in old linoleum building, yes?
It is, and I'll start off by our land acknowledgement, because Second Shift studio space is located on traditional, ancestral, and contemporary lands of indigenous people. We reside on Dakota land ceded in the treaties of 1837 and 1851. We acknowledge this place as a complex and layered history. This land acknowledgement is one of the ways in which we work to educate the community about this land and our relationship with it and with each other. So I have a long history with, just in terms of my family, goes back 5 generations. My great-great-grandfather lived about 2 blocks from this location on Payne Avenue. And I grew up close to where Second Shift is located. And Chris and I then moved back to, after graduate school, moved to East St. Paul, and we've lived there for 30 years now. So there's a deep connection with this space. We care about the community, and dreaming about Second Shift, we wanted to find a way to give back to our community and engage with it on a deeper level. And so one day we were walking up and down Payne Avenue, saw this building, went in, and it was a linoleum store for about 75 years. My grandfather purchased linoleum from this place in the 1950s. And so when we went and talked to the owner, they were ready to move on. And he made us an offer that right there on the spot. And he said, if this is the right offer, I'll give you the keys. And he handed us the keys. And so along with that, we acquired a lot of things within. So if we can go to the next slide, we acquired all this stuff. This is how we found it when we first purchased the building. And so through hours of a lot of community volunteers helped gut the place and take out all the linoleum and things from the upstairs and the downstairs. It's about a 3,000 square foot building. If we go to the next slide, this is halfway through where we gutted and did some mold remediation and just stripped it down to the bare bones of the building. If we go now, this is what it looks like currently in the space. Chris is going to talk about the kind of the vision of Second Shift and what Second Shift is about. But I will say for the rebuild of the space, we did work with a young collective called CDU, and they were just recent undergrads from the University of Minnesota. And we always like to work with, younger people, just to give them opportunities that maybe they don't have to redesign and work with a space that maybe they wouldn't till later in their career. And so this one, we talked to them about how we wanted the space to be fluid. It's not a private studio situation. This is the walls move. And so as it's clear visually what this space is set up to look to be used at. It is a space where artists breathe the same air. Difficult during COVID, but the walls can move and the space can expand and contract depending on the needs of each of the artists. We can go to the next slide. So that's looking toward the front of the space. The spaces are about, with the extension to the windows, it's about a little over 400 square feet per studio space. This is an opening we had to celebrate the new artists that we have in, with Roshan as one of those. And it's really great. It was last Thursday and had about 100 people come through. And it was really great to have people finally back into Second Shift, meeting the residents and sharing their work with the community. Next slide. This is the basement, is how we found it. And just filled, I think we filled, maybe 8 dumpsters, 20-yard dumpsters filled with just stuff that was no longer usable. And now we've turned it into, if we see the next slide, these are storage spaces. We also have a workshop down there with bandsaw and chop saw. And this is the top space, the gallery space. And maybe we can have, Chris, if you want to talk about maybe how we decided to do what we do for Second Shift and how the name, maybe how the name came about too.
Sure. So Chris and I, for a long time, have talked about trying to find a space that would allow for an artist to be able to work without financial burdens. Also work without major expectations. Like in many grants and stuff, people have to produce something very specific for an end game to that typically, not all the time. But we saw a lot of places in the Twin Cities really pricing people out. A lot of people we knew were losing studio space. The financial burden was too much. Obviously, COVID was another wrench in everyone's existence, but the premise was to allow for people to work without that hovering financial burden. Chris and I have been fortunate enough to both like have jobs and to be able to like do what we want, and we just wanted to be able to like allow other people the same experiences. So Second Shift, though, one of the reasons that we named it that is because obviously most artists do need multiple jobs. And specifically, we aimed to have artists who were marginalized by their gender identity. And in so doing, there's a lot of people who have children and they're the primary.
I think, Chris, you're cutting out.
Just a little bit, yeah.
You know, I'm sure we'll get her back in just a moment, but Chris, I'm sure you can kind of guess where she's going with that. Would you mind filling in?
Oh, sure. We can go to the next slide. Mm-hmm. Yes, so that's what the gallery, we call it more of a lab in the front. It's less of a gallery space. It's open to the residents to use. Tina's going to talk a little bit more about this, but yeah, it was really, coming from, I'm a professor at the University of Minnesota, and there's always thinking about our graduate students, and at the end of your thesis show, it's kind of builds up to this moment, and we really didn't want that moment. We wanted to create a space for these residents just to play, and there might not be anything at the end. It might just be a year of experimentation, a year of community building, a year of learning about each other's work. And so I think it's worked pretty well, that there wasn't the expectation to something to happen.
As every artist knows, the word production is like more and more in our keeping up in our mind space, that it's always about producing an end product. And every artist also knows that play and practice and like keeping the sandbox as big as possible is what allows us to get to things that we're proud of. Time-wise, what's the timeline of these things as far as like getting started? I know the building was bought in 2017, but how long have you been thinking about the idea of extending your education or your role as an educator into like a new space? And I love this idea of like an antithesis space that you're creating, or a space that exists beyond that. There's some really wonderful thing in the liminal space of Second Shift and antithesis that I'm really drawn to in the way you're all talking about this project.
Mm-hmm. So we can go back 2 images if we can.
Okay.
Yeah, we can start there. But timeline, it was purchased in, we were thinking about it it was right at, and I wish Chris could talk about it, but it was right after the election in 2016. And I think there was a lot of people thinking, what can they do within their communities to subvert or to go a different direction? You're going this way, we're going to go this way. You're buying up artist studio buildings to make a profit. We're going to give free studio space. And so I think if you can think backwards of like what some leaders in the community are doing, or not meaning like political figures, that if you go the opposite direction, sometimes that's the best direction to go.
Wonderful. And I'll step in for Fong, who will add the New Social Environment series is about matching the speed of the prior presidency. That it is about this need to fill in the gap of what's created through destruction and divisiveness with creativity. So I love the kinship that's happening in this project, that it is a response to the election, that there is a need to counteract those things.
Chris, do you want to talk about that? You're back.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't know what's happening, sorry. But yeah, it's gigantic. One of like the pivotal moments was the Women's March. I was working, I wasn't able to like get down to the Capitol, but so many people were there and it was such an important moment. And I think it was finally like Chris and I are both like, this is absolutely necessary. We have to do something right now with whatever means we can. And that's when we started really getting a lot more serious about looking around, for sure. Yeah, keep going, Chris. You can talk about the rest of that, but.
Well, we can maybe transition to Tina Tavera. Tina Tavera is a board member right from the beginning, and really admired her social activism, curatorial practices, and also really strong artists. And so, Tina, if you want to talk about the community where Second Shift resides, and different engagements we've had with the community.
Thanks, guys. Yes, I became involved with Second Shift right at the beginning, as Chris said. I was really excited about the project. Being a board member, because this neighborhood in particular has a really interesting racial and ethnic composition. It's very diverse, known for its working class, like immigrant labor force. So I thought it was great that they were doing a project in this area in particular that badly needed some, I think, assistance to lift it up. Currently in the east side of St. Paul, it's about a third white and a third Asian, but about 15% is Latino and 15% is African American. So it's really, when you are on the street in this area, you feel that. I mean, there's a lot of different restaurants still and different businesses, combination of people. But it's partly just because of there's these three, I mean, just to give a little historical perspective, there were three immigrant groups that came to the east side of St. Paul. It's interesting that they arrived for basically the same reasons, right? Security and employment, finding a community. But I would say the majority have been fleeing poverty and oppression and political turmoil. So you have these communities coming together. The first wave, obviously, European immigrants, but then eventually the immigrants were from Mexico or Mexican Americans from Texas and African Americans from down south. So it's a really interesting combination, I think, of people in that area. And then in the 80s, that we actually had the third wave, which was Southeast Asian, East African, and Central American, as well as from the Midwest and other areas of the US. But that just gives you a general idea of who came to this area. But in the 1950s, as Chris said, when his grandfather was shopping at the linoleum store, was actually the prime time for the St. Paul East Side. And it's really interesting because those were like the economic glory days where people worked at basically three places, or it's three businesses, and it was the Hamm's Beer Brewery, Whirlpool, and 3M. And the reason I bring this up is because it just brought in a lot of multi-ethnic shift workers. And I found it entertaining to imagine like them, I read this article about them toting their lunchbox, their metal lunch boxes and their thermoses full of coffee. But they described like Hamm's Brewery that the average employee received up to 8 weeks of vacation and 13 paid holiday days per year. So they were sitting well in this job, and they even received 2 beer breaks a day if you worked at Hamm's Brewery. So it sounds like the ideal life for working class, and it really thrived. But I think the casualty of the East Side unfortunately came with the same as many towns in the United States, with the foreign competition and, you know, the demise of American manufacturing, and 3M moved to a different location. And eventually there was a recession in the 70s. So by the 90s, these storefronts were all empty. So it creates a whole different scenario than that livelihood. And so when I first started in April 2019, Chris came up with this idea to do an exhibition in this area, which had a lot of abandoned buildings. And so we worked together. I think it's really important to increase visibility and opportunities for female identifying and gender non-conforming artists. And so Chris and I curated a pop-up exhibition called 33 Views Plus 2 to activate the area. And this was shortly before Second Shift opened. So we were hoping to generate some enthusiasm for Second Shift. And
I think that's
so the first place was the bank. Oh, that was the bank, the one that, this is like 100-year-old bank. So a big part of the exhibition was here. We had 35 Twin Cities based artists, and this is a 100-year-old bank, which was vacant, very expensive. So just on one floor, we had 5,000 square feet, which is the next image, Andrew. So this is, you can see there are actually offices, like, and we had the exhibition within this space. This is Angela St. Brain. So this is that's just a peek, but there was this whole floor with different artists throughout the different rooms that you entered. And then we were in 4 other locations as well along Payne Avenue. So this was actually in the furniture store that was vacant next door. And that is the work of Nushin Hakim Javardi, and she's an Iranian artist. And this is a wing, an airplane wing that we installed in the basement of the furniture store. And it actually had one wing that's suspended and another one that's shredded that you can see. It's a little dark, but you can see underneath where she has the airplane wing that's completely pile of metal shavings.
such an exciting image. Like getting
Yeah, it was exciting to get the wing into the building. It was a little bit of a challenge, but we enjoyed just laying out the artists within these different buildings. There's 5 different buildings total. And the next one here, this one is actually Alexa Orochowski's work. And she was in the second shift, sorry, when we hadn't opened yet. So it was actually sealed to the public, but you could see through the windows into the space. And she uses materials that reference soil and water preservation, as you can see. And so then the next one here, this one is actually John Ullman Gallery, which was farther down, and he had just opened recently. And then we had the installation. This is Erica Terwilliger, and she works primarily in ceramics, fibers, and printmaking. And so it was fun because the people could kind of go along the street when they came to the exhibition, and they could visit the different buildings and see the different artists. So we had a little map laying things out. And then the next one here was, oh no, I think there was one, maybe it got mixed up in the artist. So this is the last one, which was part of the 33 Views Plus 2. And this actually was in a dilapidated building on Payne Avenue, but it was, the video was projected inside. Spectral Response was the name of it, by Holly Streekstra. And we had the peepholes. So they actually was wood hanging, and then they could lift up the wood and they could peek inside. And this building had been burned somehow. And so inside it was completely charcoal, and the film was projected inside, but you could still sense, you know, it had sort of a olfactory sort of, you know, it just experienced, like when you opened the little window, the smell permeated as you watched this film inside. And it was a beautiful film. She shot it with infrared camera, and it was a circus student that was exploring a building. So it was we had the exhibition between the 5 buildings. But I guess the main point was that this was a great way to launch Second Shift. And then we've kind of kept that mentality going ever since, that it's not just the space within with the residencies, but we've been trying to do curatorial projects and outreach in different ways. So we'll have can you go one prior, Andrew? The one that was with, this is, oh, maybe not, maybe it's forward, sorry. The one with the, there. So this is an example. This is Kazua Melissa Vang, and she did fridges. So she actually works in the neighborhood, and she did a solo exhibition in that front space that Chris mentioned, that people can see from the street. So sometimes the windows are used as outreach, and then sometimes that you can come in and see a show that's distinct, or the residents themselves can use this space. And so then we also do the outside of the building. I know that we did, there isn't an image, but we also have done projects like a mural of George Floyd, and the Brooklyn Rail project, which was in partnership with Fongboy and We the Immigrants installation. And then we have sort of off-site exhibitions as well. So it's just our way of contributing to the community, the immediate geographic location, as well as other locations to promote Second Shift.
It's wonderful. I mean, a lot of work. It has the scale of a biennial that you did to get the attention to the I hope you can keep doing it, because it's wonderful to see like a whole downtown or a whole part of a town turned into liminal space and secondary space for artists. It's really exciting. Second Shift offers 4 residents a year-long studio for free. I'm sure that takes a lot of work and a lot of partnership, like Tina just brought up, with outside people. Maybe we can get into that, talking about how this community has come together to really develop the space of this residency and allow for this kind of generosity.
Yeah, I mean, the residencies are selected, or the residents are selected, and they receive the space for a year. But I think we have Arts Roshan going to talk next, Chris.
Well, we could, if you go to the next slide, we're really grateful for the Hart family. Grant Hart was a musician in the Twin Cities in a band called Husker Du, is what he probably most known for, but went on to a really great solo career. But before he died, Chris and I met up with Grant and his partner Bridget, and trying to figure out like what would happen to Grant's like royalties from his music. And he said he wanted everything to go toward, in Grant's words, women musicians and artists in the Twin Cities. And so we've been able to fund 3 years in a row now, artist stipends. Each resident will get $5,000 for however they want to use it for the year. And so we're super grateful that that is kind of like an extra bonus for Second Shift and our residents. I don't know, Chris, if you want to say anything else about this one. I think we're still having technical difficulty with Chris.
I mean, it's exciting. There's all kinds of writing. We all know that art engages as a commodity at some level in a weird economy. But that being said, there are beautiful moments like this where the generosity of like a song or a painting can actually spread and extend to fund the work of other artists perpetually and forever. Like I think of, obviously Thong has done this practice, but Soloit, there are people constantly going around the country installing Soloit drawings and like paying for their lives to be able to make things possible. So really cool grant to be able to do that. Can move on to the next slide. Wonderful. This is the work of Roshan, one of your current residents who just moved in recently and just like you said, had a show September 9th, correct? Yes. Roshan, can you walk us through this wonderful installation? This is beautiful.
Thank you so much, Andrew. And before I talk a little bit about my work, I want to thank Tina for really going into the history of the place, which even as a current resident, it's really exciting to know in what context I'm using the space, and maybe we can talk about like, the stores that live here and the interactions with us as residents a little later. So yeah, I'm Roshan Gano. I am a multimedia narrative artist. And I arrived at that because I used this particular work, my current work, is a bit of a, it's a bit of a departure from my previous work, while having the same overarching theme of like isolation, migration, and solitude, which are themes that I myself go through. So it's kind of autobiographical. What you're seeing on the screen is my latest piece of work, which is called In the Presence of Longing, this is one part of the work, but it is a much larger project where I work with my native language, which is Marathi, its translation or the lack thereof into English, and then using space, materials like glass, neon, water, light, to create an immersive environment that can communicate the nuance in language when translation is a barrier, or like communication is a barrier. So that's kind of what this space symbolizes. If we can go on to the next image. This particular piece has three elements to it. One, which is reflection, which I'm kind of using in spaces as a metaphor for like illusion, magic, a sense of wonder. And there's also creating this idea of magic and illusion by bending light through water or through glass or other materials, and kind of drawing that parallel with neon, which is bending of glass. And, in the making of neon, there's a lot of like pumping the oxygen out of it, pumping phosphorus into it, bending the glass, obviously, but also creating an environment within a tiny glass tube. If we can go to the next image. So, yeah.
I'm gonna just pull up the images in the Dropbox. But in the meantime, could you speak to the work a little bit?
Absolutely. So with the piece in the middle, which is kind of the one that is right above me right now, and there's a little video, maybe we can play it later, but in some ways, like, these are three elements in the work, but like this piece kind of brings the whole piece together, which is with glass and permeating ink, the notion of fluidity. It's layered with animation in the background. So as you can tell, there's a lot going on, but I would say that the whole work in its entirety is one entity rather than, I'm sure, I mean, you can look at each of them separately, but it kind of speaks to the overarching narrative, which, like I mentioned before, deals with migration, isolation, and solitude. So that's a very brief introduction to my work.
I love the jump you made between glasses, or different types of glass, because glass obviously, or oftentimes, not obviously, oftentimes is the portal, it's devotional, it's the stained glass, it's the way of like getting through one idea of perception into the other, and like my brain on fire with you going from the glass to the neon, and then this like virtual glass that you're like recreating. It's really cool moves.
Thank you so much.
While we're waiting for the slides, Roshan, what's it been like interacting with the community there over on Payne Avenue? Like, how's it been being in that area?
Yeah, so we moved in like on 1st of July. It's me and 3 other residents. I know through the selection process, there was a focus on what the residents will do with the local community in the area. And like community is a big part of my work anyway, but when I moved in, I could really tell why those questions were asked during the selection process. So I mean, just one example would be, there's a grocery store right next door, like it's more like a cigarette shop. So the other day I just had some extra tea on me, which I had gotten from home. So I just went over and I was like, hey, do you guys want some tea? And they have a, I think either an Iraqi background. So when Iraqi and Indian people maybe always have like, oh, I know you kind of vibe. So and then he was like, yeah, sure. So we shared tea together. It was great. And then, he would come over and be very curious, like, oh, what is that thing in the window? What's going on here? What is this poster and everything? And then one day I actually went in because I was like, okay, I work with paper mache as well. So I was like, okay, do you have some newspaper on you? And he was like, no, but I got you. So a few days later, he saw me parking my car and he was like, hey, Roshan, do you still need newspaper? I actually went to a gas station and I saw somebody throwing newspaper away. I was like, oh, I know somebody who can use that. So he kind of brought like a large stack of newspaper, which me and my colleague now share to create paper mache. So that's just one example. There's this really great, like, I don't even know which era party shop down the street. Like I walked through there, it's just such a 40 or 30s vibe. Love it. Curious objects, feeds into my work of creating magic, and like, so yeah, it's a very symbiotic existence for us right now, I think, here.
It's amazing. It's so wonderful. Cool.
Yeah.
I think we're ready with the slides now.
I think I actually spoke everything, but maybe we can just play, the video. Yeah. This is the same video I was talking about. That's above me.
Oh, and there's that strong border blocking off the two ink from mixing. Oh, excellent. Yeah. Very good piece. Very cool.
Thank you.
And the frame is wonderful. Like how the timing and the pacing of that movement in the frame is perfect. It offsets like that ink spill in such a wonderful way.
This was an interesting one because when people were coming in, like the first, which is natural, the first reaction was like, okay, what does the neon mean? Like, what is the script? Like, what am I looking at? But I've tried my best to not say that right in the beginning, because I'm like, can we talk about it a little bit more? So kind of exploring people's feelings and emotions in the space without giving them a translation, and seeing how the space and the immersive nature really expresses the meaning, and which kind of would happen, like we would have minutes of conversation and then they would be like, oh, so I feel this and I feel that, and I'm like, yeah, so that's kind of what the word is trying to communicate. And this is, of course, like Second Shift has been a huge help in this development of this particular work, because of space and the tools and everything. Yeah.
I don't want to speak of things too pejoratively, but I've run a few spaces, in like kind of non-art centers, and I feel like sometimes when like the public, whatever that means, comes into view work, a lot of people want to be let off the hook. Like they want to like say, what does that word mean, so I can know the meaning. So it's a fine line. It's a wonderful line to try to not let people off the hook, as you're saying, like let them have to like experience things in abstraction and mystery for a certain amount of time, because there are so few spaces that allow for that anymore, of just like, I don't get the answer yet, I might not for a few weeks. So I love that approach.
And it's not, I would say that it wasn't easy. It took some time to get there, because initially, like when there's so many people, your instinct is to just say, yeah, sure, I'll give you the translation. But with time, I was like, but that's not the work. Like that is exactly what is not the work. So then I kind of tried to play along with the mystery part of it, and kind of worked. Yeah.
Wonderful. I think we're ready for the next slide. Yes, and this is the work of Shen, correct? Yes, Shen, are you there?
Yeah.
Hi. Hi. Can you walk us through your practice and work?
Sure. I would like to first share some just experiences with Second Shift, because I was the year before Roshan with 3 other residents, and I moved to Minnesota end of 2019 from having lived in Europe for about 10 years. And Minnesota is my first US experience, which suffice to say, it's been quite intense. A huge culture shock on so many levels. And the Second Shift studio space has been also my first point of contact to the arts community here, and the community in general in terms of where it's located. And we've sort of participated in these community projects on Payne Avenue, where I did get to work with a poet whom I admire greatly, Sun Yongxing. And just through sort of engaging, despite the pandemic situation, engaging with where Second Shift studio space is located, and the then residents in my cohort, still sort of longing to hang out around the fire pit in autumn season, and just with our mask on and being very careful, but still like longing to be together, to know each other. And that was a really wonderful experience and escape for me during that time, because everybody knows how hard it has been to sort of live, work, sleep, eat in one space. So I'm really grateful, also considering how much work has been delayed and cut off in those years, and how valuable those support has been coming from Second Shift. And it's just been a wonderful experience for me. So with my work, just to say some general statement-like summary of it. So I make moving image installations and performances that empower alternative histories, relations, and potentials between individual and nation states. That is my focus. I seek to create affirmative spaces of belonging that embrace polyphonic narratives and identities. So the work it's just a few slides that I put together to sort of demonstrate what I have been thinking about in the past years. And this work was finished 2020, which is last year. And it's a 5-channel video installation and a 5.1 sound installation that focuses on the experience of being stateless as a result of East Asian politics, especially of the period of Japanese colonization of the Korean and Russian territories. So we focus on Dainichi and Koryo Saran people as experience, and using iodine, which is a extractive element, as a companion extractive element, as a byproduct of natural gas, to sort of speak about, not metaphorically, but in matters of translation, of the experience of not belonging to a state, and the sort of process that iodine as an element go through, whether it is to regenerate new energy, or whether it is recycling, and or just distributions to different countries that does not have sufficient amount of what they need in terms of this specific element. And this work belongs to the same series with Brian Lake, Warm Spell, and the other work, the slide follows this one. These 3 works sort of propose a method of suspending a subjectivity from the audience, which means when you are looking at these three works, they are all installation works, you would not be able to hear or read one or two characters, sound, and content, which I call them ghosts in the films. So the ghost acts as a device to sort of suspend judgments from the audience and to sort of encourage this active participation when the topic and the subject is about ethnic identification or ecological concerns. So if we go to the next slide, is there a next slide? Yes, thank you. And this is also the third work in that series, 4-channel video installation, and utilizes the method that I just spoke of the ghost. And before these three works, if we could go to the next slide, I engaged about 4 to 5 years making a series of 5 to 6 works, including performances and video installations focused on Tibetan Buddhism's migration process and assimilation process in Europe specifically. And so the way I work is research-based and very much long-term research, planning, filming, post-production. And I work with my friends and colleagues in general. And so the time that I spent with Second Shift, just to end on that note, during the pandemic, when filming was not a possibility, was a lot of reading, researching, and planning for the films and the works that I would like to make next year. And as things get better, hopefully for everybody, because it does mean to make a work for me means engaging with communities and people, which means taking responsibilities and being accountable on different fronts. Yeah, so thank you for inviting me to share my experience with Second Shift. It's been really wonderful.
I highly encourage everyone to have the experience of being to watch through these video pieces. They're really wonderful. They hit at moments that kind of go in and out of almost like a dream space. There's a moment of, I believe someone's asking, or someone's sitting in a dark space and saying, this reminds me of my office space. Is that right? And it's such a strange, wonderful vibration that obviously it's nothing like that. But it kind of reminds me at moments of like Begon's Long Day's Journey into Night. Shen does not shy away from complexity at all. They're incredibly researched. And you have an exhibition here in New York next year, correct? At the Swiss Institute. So all the New Yorkers here, you'll have the opportunity to get to see some of this work, and I highly recommend it. Really interesting.
Thank you.
And beyond that, talking about community, obviously it's been a little bit fractured with COVID. It's been made more difficult, but Second Shift has made a lot of moves to keep intentionality and community between the residents and within the greater neighborhood. Before COVID happened, there was Art Soup, correct? Could one of you speak to that, of the bringing together of each other? And hopefully you can all get back to that once things start to get back to a new normal, hopefully. Chris? Yeah.
Oh, it sounds like maybe there's some technical difficulties. I think we all understand, we love hosting, and I think good things happen when people gather around a meal. And we started doing really simple events called Art Soup, where we would invite people in to have dinner with the residents, and they would talk over a conversation over a meal. It's real casual, but sometimes intense conversations. But yeah, the idea was just to gather around a meal together with the community to hear more about what goes on inside Second Shift in the studio spaces.
Beautiful, beautiful.
So obviously the COVID shut all that down, the Art Soups. And so we're hoping that we can, in some form, have that come back, because it's such a beautiful way to share a meal and share visions with each other.
Kriss, how do you feel like education plays a role in this and like starting this space? Because you are an educator with the University of Minnesota, described as the antithesis, but obviously there's something that you felt needed to continue on past the university, or there's something that wasn't being fulfilled by that, or there's a continuity perhaps. But what's the role your own role as an educator comes into this type of formation?
I see the role of educator as a lot about sharing and a lot about, I mean, again, it was difficult, I love connecting people with the people within our community. So the first year we did have more people engage with the curators in the Twin Cities. I think it is a lot about like sharing and connecting. And with that 33 views plus 2 that Tina talked about, when we opened that exhibition, we had a special event for community leaders, and we had curators from the Walker, the MIA, from the Wiseman, from Minneapolis College of Art and Design. I think we had over 30 people, curators and directors, come to meet all these artists that we had, and we had a one-on-one engagement with people that maybe they wouldn't think they had access to. So, I mean, I think this last year, the year that Senjin was, we had, I think there was 2, I can't remember if it was Zoom conversations, but I think Tina came in, Jennifer Newsom came in, I think Victoria Sung, other board member came in and had conversations, but we're hoping to get that back. So it's connecting and sharing is what I see as part of my role as an educator.
Right. It's wonderful seeing that you're filling in the next steps of education. I think so oftentimes 2 universities get you to the BFA or the MFA, and then that's all their opportunity is for that, and they don't care that people move away or go on with their lives. And I think you've created a real space for people to stay in the community they've learned from and to continue to put things into it and work on the soil of that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's part of what Art Soup is too. It's like an extension of the critique that happens within the classroom or the studio.
Yeah.
Did you guys, when I was cut off, I apologize for repeating, but when we did pick the residents, we did do it under a broad spectrum of people who have been educated, people who haven't been a part of that community, age differentiation, and we kind of curated the group so that people could work off of each other. For example, the first year we had a local person who, her name is KB Loy. She did watercolor paintings, super skilled and amazing. And she, from what I remember, wasn't really a part of an arts education. And currently today too, we have Constanza, who again is like a self-taught artist who was never really a part of that educational system. And so we really wanted to help integrate both of those communities. So everyone's acknowledged, everyone can work off of each other, and everyone can grow.
That's wonderful. I have 2 questions before we open it up to the group along those lines, because there's so much intention here, which is what's making this work and is so exciting. I'm interested in the application process and the selection process, and would love to hear how that feels as an artist, but also what you're thinking of, the type of questions you're asking and what you're looking for on the other side of that too. And also, I love that you include Tina in the very beginning on the board, because as Andrea Fraser writes in 2016 Museums, in that wonderful text, the formation of the board is the formation of ideology and interests. And you have very intentionally formed a board that puts art and artists first, and not money, and not foundations or donations or things like that. You'd rather hustle for those things and worry about those things than worry about your artist not being cared for in the way you want to. But first, could you talk about the application process? Because it's really well structured.
Kriss, do you want to go over that?
Sure. Basically, it's an open application. the questions that we had did make reference to need. We really wanted to pay attention to people who needed a studio space, who found financial barriers. We also wanted an intention of, like I had mentioned, just keeping people involved in the community. We don't want to force anything. We do want it to be organic, but to integrate, like, some of the questions are, you know, what could you bring to the East Side community? Like, how do you feel like you could integrate that into Second Shift space as representative of Second Shift? Those are kind of the biggest things that we look for, I think. Chris, do you want to add to that at all?
I mean, the other thing, I mean, just realizing this is an open studio space. This is not private studios where you go in, shut your door and do your work. It's really, it's open. You're sharing, you're walking past each other's studio when you come and go into the space. So that was important, just to understand that you are, this new cohort of the four of you are going to be, you know, maybe collaboration happens or maybe conversation happens, but that's the hope.
Mm-hmm.
And how do they submit the work?
So through application process, through I think 15 to 20 images, and we asked them to talk about a project coming up. So it's not all about the past. It was like, what does the future look like? And the first year we had over 100 applications, and it kind of confirmed to us that there's such a need for studio space within St. Paul. So.
Mm-hmm.
I just back-ending these things, a lot of people here today might already know this, but going through 15 to 20 slides of 100 different people is a lot of work. To use the old phrase, it's the Lord's work. They're not a lot of people sit and do that. And it is like, thank you for taking the time to do that. That type of intention never gets noticed. The application process, but it is how you get the community that you've now worked very, very hard to get, which is looking through all of that.
Mm-hmm.
So the second part of the application process, we selected down from 100 down to about 15. And then we did interviews with them. The first year we were able to do it in person. We wanted to meet them. We wanted to hear them talk about their work. But the second year, that was a Zoom conversations. But I think you can tell a lot of a person through, you know, that kind of engagement, through talking to them and hearing them from their voice about their work and their intentions.
Incredible meanings developed from it too. And lastly, my question before we pass it on to the group is the board. What were the focuses of the board, and how are you thinking of the vanguarding or the stewarding or the leadership of this thing?
Chris, do you want to take that one?
Well, yeah, I think when Chris and I thought about doing this, having heard of experiences that other people have had with boards, we really wanted to focus on people who were in education or artists. And it's not a traditional board where we don't have expectations of board members to, like, provide financial means or anything. So we're trying to get support and donations outside of that, because we really want to keep the influence on the space to really focus on community and art and pretty much nothing beyond that. And so we basically kind of like just asked people to be a part of it, that we knew in the community who, like I said, were artists and educators and activists who we thought would really create a really positive community to just help foster the ideal of Second Shift, which is, I mean, our mission statement is work, make, give more than you take. And as you're just talking, like, yes, every single person on the board gave a bunch of time to really, like, go through all the slides, go through every single year that we've had so far. They've all been the same people. And it's been remarkable how great and intentional everyone who's been involved in this, as well as, like, even the people who were volunteering when we were just when we were making the building and renovating it. We had so many volunteers that it was just, it was a remarkable experience, actually, to be a part of.
Yeah, the board has played an integral part in this. I mean, they are the selection committee, and that's been really value that kind of input from the board.
It's wonderful. I mean, as everyone I think knows or agrees, art is a social thing. It is a social endeavor. It is a human involved action of like creating images and aesthetics. And people can tell very quickly when some of those steps are being skipped over for like real intentionality and really getting to know the people applying. And likewise with the board. So creating those steps is how you get the community you've made today. I have one more question. I said I only had two. Do you have any recommendations, any stories, or any fair warnings to those who want to do this in other cities and towns across the country? Any learning experiences to keep the archipelago growing? Or just you're not going to get a lot of sleep. Is it just at the second shift?
Yeah, it's a pretty steep learning curve, both of us not being architects or people in that realm. But it's a doable situation. I mean, you find a place, and we purchased the place so that we weren't dealing with rent and rent control and issues like that. And I think that's really allowed for a lot of movement probably within it. Wouldn't you think, Chris?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I also think if you are thinking about that, I mean, a lot of the energy that it is the respect and for artists in the Twin Cities is we hold them so high and what they do and the value that they contribute to the community. That is first and foremost, I mean, for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we've talked about it before, I talk about it often with anyone who listens. One of my favorite pieces is the work of Mike Kelly wearing the janitor's clothes and holding a mop. And the idea that the artist is ready to clean up a mess rather than seeing the problems and saying someone else should take care of that. It's wonderful when you meet people who sense the problem and just get to work at fixing it. Seeing that studios are getting priced out for artists, and immediately you say like, here's what we can do to start to make that horizontal and make that equitable again. So thank you for that. I think we're ready to open up to some audience questions.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much, Andrew. Thank you, everyone, for this really fantastic conversation, and thank you for rolling with it. Something that we appreciate deeply. Our first question will come from the wonderful G.E. Schwartz in the audience, and G.E., you should be able to turn on your microphone.
Thank you so much. And what a program. I want to see these in every town that has similar circumstances and needs. In some ways, you kind of already answered this question, but maybe we can even take it further. Has or does Second Shift have any plans beyond things like Art Soup to offer educational formats or further outreach for the immediate or expanding community? And I'm thinking things like even like film series or more live performances or things like that.
I guess, thinking about how we engage with the community, I mean, we've made a conscious effort hard in COVID, but it's always to point to the residents, right? To point to the residents and point back out into the community. So I think if a film series, if it would benefit the residents, I think that's a great idea.
And we have had the exhibitions too that are inside and outside of the space. I think there's a lot of benefits to that. I mean, for instance, the one with the refrigerators that Melissa did, Melissa Vang, she actually is Hmong, and there's a large Hmong community in that area. And she had these spectacular, like life-size refrigerators that showed like the cultural foods, but not just that, but they were like seeping and overflowing. And then I think that people in the neighborhood can identify with those images. And so we have tried to find ways to to figure out St. Paul Art Crawl, for instance, where they're showing the art along Payne Avenue and trying to be involved with what they already have established instead of being separate and doing our own programming, figuring out ways to get involved with those that are already there.
Thank you.
And
Yeah.
Sorry, I can just add a little bit to that for what we have planned for this year. As for residents and like just having all of the space, we've kind of divided the year into a few months that where each one will have our own solo show or like whatever we want to do with the space. And I feel like each four of us bring in a different kind of community, and there is like each person will program around their own show for the community that they're talking to, and the broader community, of course. So that's kind of a rough plan for the year.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Next up, we are going to pass the mic to the wonderful Lynn Crawford, who's tuning in from Detroit, always with like a very interesting background. Lynn, take it away.
Hi, this has been so wonderful. I'm so impressed and excited, and there's a lot of parallels between what I'm hearing today and a lot of things I've seen in Detroit in the last 2+ decades I've lived here. As a novelist and an arts writer living in Detroit, when I first moved here, it seemed so important to keep my New York connections, because there wasn't a lot going on here. And I felt sort of, I wasn't in either world. I wasn't fully in Detroit and I wasn't fully in New York. And it was just this uneasy feeling. And then as the Detroit community has grown and we've come to know of each other, it's really been wonderful to feel a sense of community here. And to have people come here and to have that kind of cross-pollination, it's been a life changer. And I'm wondering if anyone wants to speak to that. What's it like when you're living someplace that's fertile and vibrant and stimulating, and you're not always feeling like you're missing the action?
You want to take that?
Well, I can say just for me personally, coming, graduating from Yale and going to New York and looking at the studio situations there and knowing that there was a really vibrant and exciting community back here in the Twin Cities, and got a lot of questions of like, why nothing happens in the middle of this country. It's all on the coast. And I so believed in the community that was here, and it's been my home, and it's
Yeah.
And so I think I've been globally now, it's like you can be anywhere,
And do you find also that a project like this brings people out who have been doing creative work all along, but maybe not in a place where they could show it or share it?
I think it's more that a lack of space to produce has been the issue in the Twin Cities. As they're saying, the rents are really high right now in Minneapolis and St. Paul. I mean, it's hard to even find a place that's affordable for living. So the thought of having studios is becoming more and more complicated. And it seems like more people have moved to the Twin Cities. So then there's, like there used to be a lot of warehouse spaces that are less and less available because they're being converted into condos for people. And so I think,
yeah, I hear you. Yeah.
Crunch. But I think there is, like Chris said, there's a lot of opportunities, a lot of philanthropy, a lot of funders for us. Hopefully we can find ways to get financial support that way, but also the artists have a lot of opportunities. There's a tax in Minnesota that goes directly to the arts. And so at least for another, I think 10 years or so, we're sitting pretty well because there's a lot of grant opportunities to support the artists. But again, if they don't have a space to produce the work, it makes it challenging. So
Yeah, thank you.
I mean, I will say also, I do feel like there's a question here also about kind of utopian communities like alternative social models, things like that. I know, Andrew, you'd spoken in the pre-check a little bit about like the arts and cultural atmosphere in Springfield in Illinois, and like starting up these like alternative community art projects, right? And kind of seeing the project in St. Paul is like very much kind of parallel or adjacent to that. And I think sometimes in the Zoom we come together and like we realize that we have so many experiences. Like my experience in the south side of Chicago or in Pittsburgh is like so resident with like a lot of these the work that you're doing. And I guess my question is also, how much do you feel that being in kind of a regional city versus a coastal city, you know, being in the Fresh Coast, the Great Lakes, opens up new space for, you know, reconceiving of like social dynamics of arts and culture beyond just like the resourcing, right? Because, you know, it was really interesting to hear you speak about you're curating artists not just based off of their private, you know, their practice, but also relationally. And I would love to hear a little bit more about that before we go to our next question.
Shen, do you want to maybe talk about your, because you know, I think you.
Sure. Well, I was just speaking to a group of people over dinner last week about this, because we're just sort of trying to name, you know, a criteria for a place. If you have been moving around all your life, which is half of my life, I lived in rather centralized sort of, you know, capitalistic places where art is totally consumed by the sort of the system of capitalism, and sort of engaging with that means very different things, and the conversations means very different things. And one of the things that really, you know, grounded me here is partially because it's really aligned with my belief of decentralized practice and how to articulate that in encounters, especially learning so much from the communities here, including the indigenous community. For me, because my art and my practice has been largely about developing strategy in the past, before I moved to Minnesota, of not engaging with the censorship or the red line or a political sort of implication that that comes with your background of and the country that you identify with, or don't want to identify with, but is forced to anyhow. And but moving here, the sort of alignment that I felt that is close to, you know, culture on its own terms, communities on their own terms, or creating alternative terms in terms of how we want to articulate what we want, what we like to happen, sort of articulate your realities. And in that sense, I found a way to understand the things I'm most interested in, that's the closest to heart here, without having to consider the main conflicts in subjects and in contexts, such as nation-state conflicts. So to really, I really would like to credit the lakes, the nature, the communities, the people, the land, for really that groundedness.
Amazing, thank you so much. Our next question will come from the brilliant Anya Bernstein. Anya, take it away.
Hi, thank you so much. Yeah, it's been wonderful to hear about this program. And I guess you kind of touched on this with talking about how you select those who will be part of the residency, but I was just thinking about how you're describing wanting to reflect like the immense diversity in communities. And I'm wondering what your outreach program is like in the community. Like, how do you get the word out about Second Shift in order to curate these residents as you envision Second Shift to be?
I mean, it's a hard thing to do when you're selecting. I think the art is probably the most important when you're looking at, because there's a pool to choose from. I think then we try to think about the dynamics of who we are selecting and what their backgrounds are. As Chris said, not all of them have had a BFA or an MFA. I think that it's been a combination that they're coming from different places. So just the residents themselves being a part of it. And then, I think a lot of us, I mean, Kriss is connected to East St. Paul, but a lot of us aren't. So we're really cross-pollinating a lot of different groups of people in the arts through the different ways that we each work individually as well, even the board and such. So we try to stretch that as much as possible to promote the application process and, or I guess applicants and for bringing people to visit. So we just recently had an opening and we're really pleasantly surprised because it was a struggle during the pandemic. I mean, I think that applications dropped significantly at the beginning because there was probably concerns. I mean, some of them even expressed it in their applications about sharing a space and, and their health. So, but we really feel energized now as things have picked up again with the most recent opening, and we had a really great turnout, and you could see the cross-pollination. I mean, the different groups of people that come are really distinct. I'm not sure if I completely answered your question though, but and then we just look at the applications and where they're coming from and try to make a decision that, of what kind of just a diverse group and combining them.
Thank you.
Thank you. So relevant and useful to know and sort of have an inside perspective on how these decisions get made. For our next question, we'll be going to our very own Nick Bennett, closely followed by Fong Bui, who we just got a preview of. Nick, take it away.
Thank you, Malvika, and thank you everyone for joining today and for what you do as Andrew said, the Lord's work. My question, actually, Andrew, you kind of asked it, but I will I hope expand it a little bit. I'm curious just because, of course, Andrew, you are part of Super Duchess, and of course, we're talking about Second Shift today. And these conversations, of course, are live, but, they exist also on this archive we're building. And I'm curious, for people that may be listening at some point in the future that come back to this, what advice you would give them or any pointers you would give to people, whether it's like a residency program or an exhibition space, but more broadly, just an artist-run space, a space that's made by artists for artists. If you have any kind of words of advice, or not to put you on the spot, but for the artists part of the program, in the time that you get to be there, if you have any questions for each other that sort of were born out of spending that amount of time together and kind of creating your own sort of little community within this residency. So hopefully that didn't go everywhere, but that's my question.
Roshan, do you want to give some advice?
Sorry, I thought that question was for Andrew, which is why I was.
It's for everyone. If
Yeah.
Okay.
Andrew, maybe you want to take it first, or Roshan, if you want to.
I'll say it quickly. I mean, I've been so excited about this conversation all week because I identify with it on a lot of levels. I like trying to build tree houses when I was a child. There's something about being an artist that you try to create spaces within spaces. And for me, the more I'm in a community or in a place that doesn't understand me or what I do, the more I get to work to try to create a space for people like me and people not like me, and trying to create something to get it going. When I lived in Southern Illinois, I didn't wait to move to New York to do something. It's about building safe space for other people and creating that wherever you're at. And I think I really admire anytime I get to meet other people that, are building tree houses or building spaces for other people to get into, that then are also open. I was also thinking of fort building, but that has such a connotation of militarization that, I think there is something about the safeness of inside, but then something that's also open to the outside as well at the same time. I think that's actually how politics can look within the art world, is creating that space for people. So it feels meaningful. But for my quick answer, with running a gallery space, it's all about the team. And it's all about like finding a team of people that are pulling in the same direction. That can be really difficult, but it's about finding something that's about mutual respect and like trying to extend that generosity past the borders of that team so that more and more people start kind of like collecting to it. But Roshan, all to you.
No, I would totally agree. And I really like what you said about the use of space, because I feel like as an artist, especially having the space, but even thinking of it from a curatorial perspective, kind of almost like dismantling the white cube from time to time to welcome ideas and thoughts. And like, of course, we did have a critique recently, which was great, and having more of those to bring in people from different even professions to see our work and like share their thoughts, but also once in a while, just in the same space, which is the white cube, like transforming it completely and making it something. It's not maybe, sharing a meal in that space, cooking in the space, or building, I don't know, having not activities, but like engagement and outreach within the community space for people that you normally would not see walk through a white cube, like letting all kinds of thought processes walk through and see what happens with the space with you. I personally am interested in that kind of dismantling from time to time, because I feel like going to art school kind of almost solidifies the white cube in many ways. And the three of us, four of us, have an opportunity to really challenge that and say, let's see what happens when we don't do a white cube event.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And for our final question, I'm so pleased to hand the mic over to our publisher and artistic director, captain of this fine ship, Phong H. Bui. Phong, take it away.
Thank you, Malvika. Thank you, Malvika. Woo-wee! I think here we are.
This is the echo that we try to figure out every day at the office.
Phong and Andrew, I'm going to ask you to unmute together on that laptop. Okay. And does that sound great? Okay.
Thank you. I think it works.
Beautiful.
Thank you. I heard the whole time. I was in all the meeting, but I heard every single word. And yeah, it goes back to thanks for waiting, John, the great poet for today's NSE. Thank you. No, I remember talking to Chris when I went there for the McKnight Fellow. Everything is about spending time with the artists, the poet, the writer, the philosopher, all of our friends in the art and the humanist sectors, really. Spending time, talk to them, that's how we learn what they do. What Irving Sandler, our beloved friend, the great art historian call it at on-the-spot art history. You don't make assumption. You do not know what people do. You can't just read things that they create. So take it for grantedly because you have learned something, some phrases from the academy. No, you're there spending time, talking to them from ground up. And that's what I did with Chris, I think. And I remember he described when he was in grad school, 2 incidents. One is his encounter with Giacometti's 1934 surrealist sculpture named Hands Holding Void. And that was a very important piece for Chris because he was so compelled by the 2 hands holding the space in between, the void. You know, he questioned about that void. What does that mean? That void is to be filled by all of us, essentially. So we should never get so eager to looking for question, looking for answer. It's amplify the question and question that void. for so long. I think that voice was a similar applied to when Richard Serra came into the tail end of his second year. He was a very popular critic. So instead of spending a whole, I think, hour, it was 15 minutes he can spare. And then he came to Kriss. He was making these sculptures. I remember, you can correct me, Kriss, a pile of different kind of woods, lumber, because you grew up in the forest and your family is involved with lumber industry in any rate. So that's how you cope with being displaced at Yale Graduate School, which we call jail, not jail. But you, I love that story so much, Tina, Kriss, and you guys. I remember how he came in, he saw this arch sculpture that piled up all kind of woods, and then Kriss was having a hard time thinking it will collapse. So he went to learn how to weld a piece of metal in the middle to hold it. So when Richard Serra came in, he said, "What the hell is that?" He said, "Well, it's a sculpture I just made." He said, "No, the middle part, the thing that hold in the arch." And he said, "Well, let's pull it out." And Kriss said, "No, I can't pull it out because it will fall apart." And just because of his mere demand request was so strong, the both of them yanked that sculpture, that structure out, and the thing about to collapse, but it held together. And he went to the door and he said to Kriss, "Mean what you say and say what you mean." And he left. So those two incidents is why certain people go to graduate school for. So graduate school can be very useful, and to whom you encounter is also useful. The way I read, my dear friend Kriss, is that exactly how I was growing up in the French colony, you know, but I remember in like 9th grade reading Camus, Albert Camus, who say once, "Don't walk before me, for I might not follow. Don't walk in front of me, I might not lead. Walk beside me and be my friends," you know? So I just felt like Kriss is my friend. And extending it in his partner, Kriss, the frontline worker, you know, Tina, Tavera, and the rest of our board members, some of them are not here. Carrie Morgan is here, but she's not showing her face. She's the one who organized my trip to Minnesota, to St. Paul. Hello, Carrie. So my point is just about the community, just about the expansion of the heart. Hi, Carrie. She's the one who put us in touch.
You should be able to turn on your microphone if you want to say hello.
I just want to say I'm missing Fong. It's been so many years, and what a joy to see and all these wonderful people together. So I just feel very full. So thank you.
Thank you for making that happen. So that's it. That's the whole idea, this community, which lastly, I just to share with you, Maurice Flamac, who's a great painter, contemporary of Matisse and the Faux painter of the 3rd century, who once said, "Intelligence is international, stupidity is national, and art is local." So that's it. Art is local. So here we are connected all together. So I'm grateful to have you here. Roshan is a terrific artist. And Chen, I can't wait to see your work. I will fly there super soon. And meanwhile, sending love and admiration to you all. Thank you. Grazie mille.
And Fawn, thank you for serving on the board of Second Shift.
Anytime. Woo!
How fantastic. So it's our tradition at the Rail to end with a poetry reading. This is a tradition we've carried over through the entire pandemic from the days when we were in the office reading poetry to one another, and such a blessing that it seems like perhaps soon we will all be in the office again reading poetry to one another over the table. But until then, today I'm so excited to be welcoming poet and writer John Latta to the Zoom stage. He's the author of Rubbing Torsos, which came out with Ithaca House in '79. He's also the author of Breeze, which came out with University of Notre Dame Press in 2003. Between 2006 and 2015, he regularly assembled notes and quotes for a blog called Isolda di Rifiuti. A longish sequence called Notes Written in June is at Black Box Manifold and is part of a book-length work he's working on now. He lives in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where he routinely tramps the woodlots and riverbanks, birding, a kind of hyper-local detail which feels so relevant today. And most recently, John has 3 poems featured in the September issue of The Rail. I'll drop those links below, but John, take it away.
Thank you. The whole discussion was wonderful. I had sought to provide a kind of continuity by reading one of the poems that's in the Rail called "To a Painting." It's about a painting by John Lafarge. It's called Hillside, Long Island. It was the continuity sort of falls apart though, considering that Lafarge seemed to be the exact opposite of the kind of artist that Second Shift is enabling, and he was a typical 19th century aristocrat artist, friend of the James brothers and friend of Henry Adams, studied law in Paris, or studied law in New York, painting in Paris with Thomas Couture and Jean-Francois Millet, spent time in Tahiti with Henry Adams. Apparently he left shortly before Gauguin showed up. At any rate, I'm not sure exactly. I think I encountered this painting first through something that Roger Shattuck had written about it. I find it a very, very strange painting, and in my mind, I associate it with Francisco Goya's painting called The Dog, which has a small dog at the bottom and then a vast sort of wall hill behind it. This is called To a Painting. A muddy field with something like a dog's snout or a cataract of yellowed leaves, marring it with a skewed semiotic up where it meets a noticeably vacant sky, thin blue. Inapproachable rusts, not a dimple, a hapax legomenon of weeds the color of the word farouche or chert. An Irish setter running a shuffle step with a white moon in its mouth. Parmenides pulling a long stem of liquid, absinthe green, up a long bulbed pipette. Looking's plenum arrogates to itself every distal inch, feigning prehensile moitié with the attending motor of the tongue, who swears it is all for naught, or says, so anyways, abruptly shutting up like an ironist. This is called To the Literary. These are all from a manuscript that is called To a Pencil, and they all begin with "to" in the title. To the Literary. Stunning the number of books unconsumed, stacked up against my sunset years, my futurity of genial camaraderie. Lenin says the end result excuses all manner of ruthlessness. The metaphysical distance approaches like a dog barking in its sleep. I am a member of the bicycle battalion, a two-fisted adherent dubbed one of the gaga and sinister out of some colossal ordinary breach of the arbitrary. Style is a mask. Lenin says, No revolutionary practice without revolutionary theory. Oh, nobody likes a pre-declared successor. You'd better eat without me. And just one more. This is called To Romanticism. I was reading Samuel Taylor Coleridge's notebooks, which are fun to dip around in. I guess that triggered this. That untamable ape Coleridge in the Gutch notebook, and write impromptus spurring their Pegasus to tortoise gallop, flying ads of the radical propensity to talk, endlessly talk, unthwarted by the drag of writing's scratch-ass carapace, its rigidity and final stoop. He'd con the plowboy Huodes down out of sky with that yak implacable, talk splitting the green bark of the heavenly tree of talk. The chill heights of it, climbed by spurious mounting nasals and vagaries. I sink it to rut fervencies in a poorhouse of denim striped mattresses. Echantillons of the midriff, plumpish, unstately, and scissor-chopped hither bangs. A transport to somewhere. November off Tuantepec or Decemberum's puckish arias, sunk deep in red plush under the ungirdered vault of sky. I fucking love that sky. I fucking love that sky. That's it. Thank you.
Love that sky. Thank you so much, John, for both the acrostic, the landscape, the poems, the sentiment. So fantastic. And thank you, Kriss, Tina, Kriss again, Roshan, Shen, and of course, thank you, Andrew, for keeping us so beautifully in conversation. This has been fantastic. I think a wonderful example of cultural generosity. We're so excited to watch what you have in store. And while we have you, for those in the Midwest, passing through the Midwest, exploring these fantastic cities, Roshan Ganu's In the Presence of Longing will be opening at the Duluth Art Institute in Michigan just in about, yeah?
In Duluth, sorry.
In Duluth.
At the Duluth Art Institute in Minnesota.
In Minnesota, sorry, thank you. Yeah. Duluth Art Institute in Minnesota, Twin Cities, give it up, October 18th, 2021. We'll drop a link shortly. Shenchin's Brian Lake, A New Body will be on view at the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis, starting off November 18th, 1 month apart exactly. Extremely excited for those, so check them out. From our end, we'll be uploading this recording to our event archives online as well as to YouTube, so it'll be available in just a few days if you'd like to revisit this conversation. And we do this every day at The Rail, so please join us again tomorrow when we're joined by artist Tamashi Jackson, Adriana Farmiga, and writer Lee Ann Norman for a conversation on the land claim on view at the Parish Art Museum through November 7th of this year. We'll close that off with a poetry reading by Erin Marie Lynch, and that will be, as always, at 1 p.m. right here in the Zoom. I want to pass the mic just momentarily to Andrew before, actually, Andrew, you can close us out. That would be fantastic.
I said one last thing.
Yeah.
Everyone here, the board members, the artists, they don't look it, but I guarantee you they're tired because they're taking on a lot of things. People who are picking up mops and drywall and doing all those things are typically asked to pick up more mops and more drywall, and no one's checking in on our health. No one's saying, are you sleeping okay? No one's doing that. So before we leave, how can we help you? What needs do you have right now? How can we get you money to keep sustaining this thing? Or what is it that you need to keep this beautiful thing going?
We need funding. We're a 503. We're a nonprofit, and so there was a question in the chat. We did get a little bit of funding from the city of St. Paul, but yeah, it's been through private donations from the community, large and small. So if you can help get the word out, we'd appreciate it.
Absolutely. donate, help, smash the donate button, send it, share it, help support this wonderful community.
Just saying, we've dropped all of the links mentioned, including the donation link. Get involved, material donations, follow them on Instagram, sign up for the newsletter. We all pass through St. Paul. It's the heartland. So really looking forward to following along. And now, what we'll do is we'll, invite you all to turn on your microphones in case you'd like to say goodbye on your way out, or hello to one another, or anything else that you feel compelled by the spirit. But this has been beautiful. What a wonderful way to spend an afternoon. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone.
Very
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tina.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Roshan.
Thank you. Thank you,
John.
everyone. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Shen.
An example to
Thank you,
replicate. Thank you.
guys.
And Malvika.